Howdy, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for another edition of the Arms Bumanlag Project live stream podcast. And this is season 2, episode 2. We're off to the races here in 2022, and we're happy to have you along for the ride as usual. So we're going to attempt to stick to some sort of regular schedule for the podcast here as we do it live Tuesday nights right across Windsor and Essex County. And this is a chance for you to comment, chat with us, and get to know some pretty interesting people here in the Windsor-Essex County area. My name is Arms. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we've got, I think, 47 plus episodes, including season 2 and season 1 for you to download, and tons of great guests to talk to and hear from over the last couple of months since we've been doing the show. So you can find those past episodes of the podcast up online right now on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify as well. Lots to get to tonight, including my guest who is standing by to chat with us about something I think a lot of us need to revisit. We need to dive into and really get to a point where we can kind of talk with each other one-on-one and be sort of the change that we'd like to see. She is a psychology professor. She is a TEDx speaker. She applies positive psychology to facilitate personal growth and transformational change. Huge fan of her work. You might have read it. I certainly have read quite a bit of it through the Drive magazine. She's a guest on numerous podcasts here locally and across Canada. I'm happy to welcome my friend, Dr. Andrea Dinardo, otherwise known as Dr. D, to the Arms Bumanlag Project live with us this evening. Dr. D, what is going on? Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this, Arms. That my passion for psychology is really about helping people find their voice. And this is the work that you do, and this is certainly where we connect. In my classroom, I've been teaching for almost 20 years now in the nursing program at St. Clair College. And before that, I'm a psychologist by trade. And I always wanted to be a psychologist. That's all I ever wanted to be until my calling found me, which was teaching. And I came to teaching not because it was a choice, but because I was laid off from the Windsor Catholic School Board. Yeah. And so most of the great things in our life, when we're in it, and you know this from your own personal experience, which you know all about resilience, you live resilience, is that when you're in it, just like so many people right now in the pandemic, that we can talk about it being universal, but our experience with it is very personal. And so essentially when I went from practicing, I continued to practice as a psychologist for 18 years and overlap with teaching. What I realized, and the school board called me back, but by then I really found my passion in teaching, is that I really wanted to give people, including your audience, the tools to take care of themselves and to trust their voice. And that's why the Good News Project is so critical, because the science of arousal, stimulation, stress, and thresholds is we're being overly stimulated to the point of panic. And that's why we need to take a step back and pause and find our own place within it. And this is what this is all about right here.
Yeah, Dr. D, and you're going to be like my go-to doc on the show, like as we go. Like I'm telling you, I'm so pumped that you're here because we get so much ground to cover tonight. But yeah, I mean, Dr. D, you hit it right on the head. It's like, we were saying just before we went live, like I've done, my background for media through the years. I've noticed in the last 5 to 10 years, especially, and even in the last 2 to 3 years, I mean, global pandemic aside, there has been a skewing, in my opinion, of some negative news being forefront.
Yes.
And I look at it from a business lens, out of officially the traditional media, and saying, okay, so if everyone's going left, there has to be a market for right. And, that's why I wanted to start the show, because I felt like this was going to be such an opportunity for, some of the good things that I see happening in Windsor and folks who are doing some incredible work like yourself, to have that opportunity to kind of say, yes, we can point out flaws, and yes, we can point out the issues that are happening in the world today. I'm not making any kind of assumption, and I said this to somebody the other day, Dr. D, I'm not saying everything's roses and sunshine and lollipops, because it's not.
No.
But I think that there's a real problem in traditional, sometimes journalistic media or in other things where it's like, yeah, here's the two competing voices and let them have at it and away we go. And we'll never revisit it again. As opposed to saying, here's the issue. How can we solve it collectively together? Let's see both viewpoints.
So what you're talking about is a theory of psychology called broaden and build. And it's also, if we talk about something, your viewers will be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Essentially, we have to get to a place of safety and security. So yes, watch the news. What I tend to do is I go to the original news source. And so I get the facts and the stats. So as a psychologist, we are trained to do assessment, period. 99% of our work, educational psychologists, counseling psychologists, retired my practice in 2016 so I could focus on writing for the Drive magazine. This is one of my articles. And then I also wrote 3 psychology textbooks because I want to get that information out there because I want to have access to information so that we can feel secure in ourselves. So collect the data. Don't ignore the data, because we can talk about something called toxic positivity, which everybody throws that around. We can talk about spiritual bypass, and then we can talk about positive psychology. Positive psychology is something I turned to in 2000 when I was struggling as a young psychologist to cope with the trauma that I was working with. And the model was all negative all the time. What's wrong with you? I will, all as you do, Arms, you are a journalist, you're a trained journalist. You will always acknowledge the facts. When we're talking about good news, we don't ignore the bad news. What we do is we fill ourselves up, we broaden and build with the good stuff, and then we get to work. We create the space for healing. But first, that's where, this is where, like, everything about the heart, like even when I posted today, that our mind is not our mind. It's a collective mind of propaganda. And so that's what you're talking about the news. Yeah.
Why, Dr. D, why are we hardwired as a species, as a society to, let's get negative. Let's really hammer home people. It's like that whole grab your pitchfork and judge, jury, and executioner all in one kind of thing.
It's called the negativity bias. And because we have different parts of our brain, and our limbic system is what we share with, you work for the Habitat Society, so we share it with all animals. It's a reptilian brain, and essentially we're hardwired for negativity or anything dangerous for a number of reasons, but it's sort of like, let's see the predator coming and then we can take care of it. But the problem is that it's not gradients. We have a visceral reaction to all of it, and that's why the pause. I have something called emotional CPR that I've done a presentation on. It's essentially you need to take a pause back and you realize that it's not danger. Just look at the headlines now. Every single word in the headline is charged with emotion to grab you. And so that's why you have to, and I had an interview called, with what she said on several radios called energy management. And it's the idea that you have to look, we all want to watch the news, but make sure that we're filled up before we sit down and watch the news. Otherwise, we're too easily triggered. So yes, we have the negativity bias, but we can offset it with a good night's sleep, connection, good food, silence, cuddles with Liam, a good talk and a glass of wine with your wife, your viewers, all of that stuff. Like whatever makes you feel safe and secure, do that on repeat, and then look at the news, and then deal with what you have to deal with. But it's not as it's like it's life and death, but the news makes it life and death 24/7, and it's not necessarily that for you, Arms, and it's not necessarily like that for me. And what I found is when I'm in that place, I think about, being prepared. And the best way you can be prepared is really from a good news perspective, from a positive perspective. Because what happens is when we're in that negativity bias, it's that fight or flight or freeze. And as we start to fill ourselves up with good news, with remembering, Arms, and your audience, all that we've overcome in the last 20 years of our life, then all of a sudden we can handle those challenges because we're now at the penthouse of our brain, which is our cerebral cortex. And that's when you're Einstein. That's when you got it. So they're coming in at the danger zone. And if you, like, literally, I mean, I've been teaching online for 2 years now. I was live and in person in the fall. That when I teach online, when I do things, I put my Doc Marten combat boots on so that I'm like grounded and prepared. I have been through a lot in my life, and shout out to Chrissy's kickboxing. When I was kickboxing, and I do kickbox and all of that, that prepared me. F45 and the team at F45 prepares me. Frank's, Mud Club prepares me. When I walk into class, that prepares me. And then collectively, we have strength. We're just so much stronger than we think. We really are. That's why we have to get out of our mind into our heart, because our heart is based on the French word for cœur, which is courage. And it's no surprise that based on what you've been through with Liam and a beautiful daughter, right? Are you not sure? Yeah, daughter on the way in April.
Yeah.
That it was all about his heart. They don't want you to know how strong you are. It doesn't sell.
Yeah. I just, Dr. D, God love you.
Dr.
Dinardo is my guest on the show tonight. Love for you to comment. If you got any questions, comments, we'd love to hear from you. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Feel free to comment, and we will bring those messages, questions up for Dr. D as well. When I was in the news biz, certainly from a public broadcaster standpoint, to a T, Dr. D, often there would be a term that would be thrown around newsrooms, like if it bleeds, it leads.
Yes.
Right. And we would, quite honestly, you'd get the eyes, you'd get the clicks, you'd get the viewership in that capacity, or the listenership in that capacity. But, I like to say, like, especially with this particular program and other people who are doing similar things across the web and across the world, how about if it makes you smile, then it's got to be worthwhile.
I love it.
I just throwing it out there,
Yes.
It's like, I think if we're able to kind of say that and then have those stories, like one of the things I like to do, Dr. Dion, and I haven't had a chance to do it more recently, but, one of the things that I used to bring to the forefront, especially to me, I used to enjoy finding out the stories of, and again, this comes from my personal background with Liam, other families here locally who have or had critically ill children, or perhaps weren't getting the supports or funding that they needed for whatever reason, kind of telling their stories from a public perspective and to say, what is it like for them in a day-to-day? How can we as a society help them? What kind of support should be in place for these particular individuals? And I thought it was important to show those stories, especially to give it like a human element to it, because I think so often when we can look at the data and we look at the numbers that come out for any kind of given story or any kind of news, I've found, especially when it came to, PR work or anything like that, it's like, yeah, you can throw numbers out all the time. But if I can hopefully show, hey, this is somebody that you might know, this might be your neighbor, this might be somebody who owns a business in your particular neighborhood who's going through this affliction, going through this time, that humanizes, I think, a lot of those stats and data that comes out. And hopefully, I know for me personally, it's like if I read a story or I see a story like that, it allows me to connect with that individual. And especially if it's a sick child, it's like, my God, like, for everything that we went through, maybe it had it in that particular section where it was a little bit worse. You know what I mean?
And Arms, that's so important. It's interesting you say that, because this is who I am. This is who I've always been. In psychology, we study something called the temperament, and I'll come back to what you were saying, and that there are 3 different types of babies, okay? That you have the difficult child, the easy child, the agreeable child. And my nature is agreeable, but I work at it to be more agreeable. And so back to that, one of the reasons that you'll find me in a positive state of mind is exactly what you just shared. As a psychologist for 18 years, I spent time with parents and children similar to that. So what that does, and this is the opposite of the bad news, is it gets me out of my mind into another person's life. And I realize no matter what, I can handle what I have to handle if they can handle what they have to handle. So I think too often what happens when you get into that negativity danger zone, it's me all the time, because that's what fear is. You're in protective mode. And then when you share a story of courage, so when you share a story of overcoming, you share an exemplar. So for example, everybody's going back to school. I'm not going to deny in any way the challenges that parents are under, the fear that's induced in them. And that's why my next article in the Drive magazine is called Put a Time Limit on Negativity. So if you're together for an hour, spend 10 minutes talking about the fear, the blaming, the complaining, the government, the this, the that. Like, that's real. But save the next 50 minutes for talking about the strengths that you've instilled in your children by looking at exemplars like you've shared. What you just shared right now, those are examples of parents that had to overcome so much more. They had their own personal pandemic and before this pandemic, so that we're built for so much more than the news tells us that we are. We're essentially being told that we're incapable of anything, that we have no self-efficacy, that we're not capable, and that, you know what, we are, like all of us are. So one of the things I'll do with students is I'll say, think back to what you overcame to get into the nursing program, what you overcame in the first week. Because what happens when we're in stress, talk about the negativity bias, we essentially have stress amnesia. And we drop back down to our limbic system, it's called the amygdala hijack, which was coined by Daniel Goleman, the author of Emotional Intelligence. And it's the idea that it just comes on to you like that. And when you step back and you listen, as you shared, and I've seen your interviews, Liam, or Arms, and I see what people can do. So stories are everything. Stories are the best way to really bring it alive.
Yeah, Doctor, I think that's so crucial to say. I mean, when you talk about resilience and certainly stemming back to people becoming more resilient, and I'm so glad that you brought up, what's going to happen come Monday. I've got my big desk calendar on the side here, so I'm always looking at it. But what's coming on Monday for a lot of these folks, putting their kids back into school, and the big what ifs and the what knowns, and when you teach resilience, it's almost like and I've said this to a lot of the families, like when we were up at Sick Kids with Liam back in 2018, having an opportunity to get to know like the amount of families from Windsor that were up in Toronto. That I would be walking through the halls with Liam, and he's, attached to all this machinery, in the middle of the night, because he's not sleeping, I'm not sleeping, and I'm walking through the halls with him. And then, you run into people from Windsor, and it's like, yeah, my kid's here because of this. My kid's here. I'm here from this. But I've said to those folks, and I've said to a lot of my family members too, it's like, you go through hell and back, but then it also prepares you, doesn't toughen you, but it certainly hardens you to take on those challenges that may come down the road. They're not, I don't want to dismiss that. Like Carrie and I, quite honestly, Dr. D, we talk about it all the time. If and when Liam needs more surgery, there's a part of me, honestly, it's terrified. But I know whatever we need to get done for him, if he needs something, we'll get it done. And we'll face it, because I'm sure, like I've said to Carrie many times, like we've done everything we possibly can do, and we'll try to finish it through to the end. So I think part of that resiliency, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. D, it's toughening, having that sort of emotional armor on to say, yeah, I can head back into the arena.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And give yourself that time to feel that terror, and that's human, and that makes it real. But what you went through before, exactly like you said, prepares you for what's about to happen, which gives a model, Arms, for exactly what all of us are going through right now, which is 2 years ago, for some people, they thought it would last 2 weeks. Then it's 2 months. Then it's 18 months. And then we get vaccinated. And then we get boosted. Then we have our vaccine passports and all of these things. And what happens is we go through what's called, and yourself included, because we all have our own personal pandemics within the global pandemic, is Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. And for some of us, it's daily. So for a lot of people in this most recent, let's call it what it is, shutdown, that were in shock. then we're in depression, and then we're in anger. And then at some point, we have to get to a level of acceptance, not because we condone it, but because we have work to do. Mm-hmm. And similar to what you shared with Liam, and let's also think about the best case scenario, right? With Liam and with your daughter, the best case scenario. So that we now know what to do. I now know what to do. 2 years ago, I didn't know what to do. Even at the gyms, at the restaurants, when I walk in, you have to get to a state of acceptance because we have to get to work. And that actually, when I find myself in a state of stress, anxiety, any of those things, I find the best way for me to handle it is to write, to speak, to teach, to prepare. So how can I use the energy that I have to pay it forward so that, that we can all learn together, so that it can be collective. So if we talk, I did a blog post and a video on and I'll ask you this, Arms, and your audience, what has COVID awakened in you? What are the parts of you that were dormant that, for me, it was certainly an appreciation of present moment time. So there's no place to go. There is absolutely no place to go. We can't forward trip because we really don't know what the future is. If we're going to backward trip, we're going to go to 2019. Mm-hmm. And so all of us, we can't have horizontal space. So now in a lot of ways, we have to make vertical space. So what's happened is, for a lot of us, for myself personally, I'm making hard decisions in my life with relationships, with boundaries, with work. This is why we have the Great Resignation. Because in a lot of ways, I think what's happened is we fast forwarded. So what choices I would have made 10 years from now, I'm making it now. With my husband too, with my family. And so when I say, for the number one thing that's awakened in me, I remember back in March when it first happened, I was out for a run on Ganacho Trail. I'm usually a friendly person, but I was a super friendly person. And I'm like, when I go out to come see, because I live in East Windsor, I talk even more so, we have this one thing in common we can talk about. So we can go to that place of complaining and blaming, and then we can quickly go into what's different for you that you wouldn't have noticed in your life before. And for me, it's this moment, Arms, this opportunity to talk to you, to be in present time with you, these opportunities that have opened up. I'm not saying that condones in any way the pandemic, but I know things in my life and a lot of people's lives have moved a lot more quickly than they would have otherwise.
Yeah,
time has changed.
Yeah, Dr. D, you're just hitting all the nails on the head here. We've got some comments rolling in. We'll get to those in the next little bit. Dr. Andrea Dinardo is my welcome guest here, episode 2, season 2 of the project. We'll get to the comments for Dr. D in the next couple of minutes. One of the questions Dr. D and I are throwing out here tonight, and certainly you can comment after the fact too if you're listening to this on the podcast, on Apple Podcasts, how has COVID sort of changed you? What has it brought to light? And for me, and I've said it many times here on the show, it's just how much I miss doing this. And I miss connecting with people in Windsor. There was a reason, when I was working at CKLW, I love to be doing my show in the community. I love to be getting out, doing events, really meeting people, getting to know people, making those connections. And, when I landed at the Humane Society, I'm very blessed because I get to do that. And I get to I've joked around, I get to come home to Windsor in the sense that I can, even in a pandemic, just being able to connect with folks and say, okay, how can we make this work for the best possible outcome for everyone included? Now with this show, it was funny because I've been really wanting to do this for a couple of years, ever since I left the CBC. And then the pandemic hit and couldn't do it. And then beginning of this year, my wife was like, okay, why don't you try it? But maybe you should spend time editing it. Maybe I don't think you should do it live. You shouldn't do this. You should. And I said to Kara, I'm like, my wife, Dr. D, I'm like, I never, going back my 20 years on doing radio and TV, I was always a stickler for live. I have to do it live. I can't pre-record. I'm not a pre-recorded guy. I'll do it. But what gets me going is the ability to do things in the moment and to have those moments. And it may not always be a home run, but it's like that old Johnny Carson, like, something would go wrong, they would quickly sort of fumble and get back on the bike, so to speak, to make it happen. So for me, it was like, okay, finding out all the things that I may have sacrificed because I wanted to kind of turn a page professionally and get back to that and say, how can I do this to make me feel better? Because I always joke around with Carrie. It's like I do the show and then I'll come up and she goes, "How was it?" I'm like, I feel alive. I feel like a bull in a china shop when I'm done a
Ah,
show. You know?
okay. Okay, so you just touched on mental health, mindfulness, resilience, and hope. What the pandemic has done for all of us is it's created this space that hasn't been, it doesn't matter who it is in this world. You walk into a store, you ask this question. It has created space for us to find places where we feel alive, that's always been in us, and we've had to be creative. And you are meant to be live and in broadcasting. This is it. And kudos to your wife too.
Dr. D, she's like, oh, yeah, because I was getting ready to come on. We put Liam to bed tonight. And, she goes, well, you going to show? I go, Dr. Dinardo is going to be great. She goes, okay, I'll watch. And she knows. She goes, it's one episode a week,
I love it. And let me just say, to add to that because every step of COVID creates a new level of pain and a new level of power. The pain tends to come from the outside and the power comes from the inside. So I've really deepened my relationships in the community. My gym is like my church. So shout out to Sam Purcell, who is the F45 studio owner. And one of the things that I do, psychology in every form possible. That's what makes me feel alive. The opportunity to see like a light bulb go off in everybody. So practice psychology, teach psychology, write psychology, train, develop, you name it. And in 5 weeks ago, I was invited from the Windsor Health Unit to give a headline speech on resilience. The staff of over 450 now. You can imagine what it's like for them to be on the front lines. And Dan is the HR director, and they found me on LinkedIn. And so they invited me, they cleared the schedule so they could have this talk. This is before Omicron was coming down.
Sure.
And so they invited me to give this talk on December 8th. And in the midst of it, my stepmom, speaking of heart, had a cardiac arrest in a parking lot. And she didn't make it. She actually died a month ago today.
I'm so
and
sorry.
Thank you. And she was a teacher, Jan Mallory Wood. She was a guidance counselor. She was my stepmom for 31 years, and an incredible role model for me. And my dad, who really supports my work, my mom's actually a psychologist too, and she said, they said whatever I can do to support you to still make that speech. Well, what made the difference for me, ARMS, is that the team of people at F45 in Tecumseh, and I'm open and friendly, but I'm a very private person. And this is the first time I've talked about it publicly, so thank you. I'm at a place of healing at this point. And we wear something called a lion heart there, and I mean it, and you know it. That health is health, and mental health is health, and wellness is health, community is health, and we know it at such a deep level, deep inside of us, that we took for granted before. And I've always been a leader, and I've let myself be led in this pandemic, and it's been one of the most humbling and encouraging things I've ever been through. So just on top of what you're saying, I've never felt more connected at a deep level to the people in my life that I need to. And at the same time, I've said goodbye to people that I can't be connected to. You hear what I'm saying? You just think of what you had to let go of when you were going through with your son. So this is a dedication to Jan on 111. She's alive, she's with us. And if it weren't for the team at F45, and really, as I say to Sam all the time, it's like our gyms, our restaurants, this with you right now, this is our church. Our church is what makes us feel alive. Our church is what lets us let our guards down. Our church is what lets us speak our truth. forget about religion, whatever you want to call it. It's what connects us, and heart and soul. So yeah.
I love you. I love you. I love it. I love it.
Right
I
back
think
at you.
this is Dr. D. God bless you. Some comments rolling in here. Let's get to a few of them. Big one here from Paul watching on Facebook. He says, my niece grew up with a sister with severe medical needs. As a child, she endured so much and missed many of the typical childhood experiences because of her sister's needs. Not to diminish her experience, but I believe the struggle in her resiliency has molded her into a strong, successful, empathetic woman that she is today.
Paul, thank you for sharing. That's called post-traumatic growth. And I know Liam, I keep saying Liam, so he's in my heart right now, Arms. You've talked about the concern around post-traumatic stress, PTSD, and the birth of your child coming up. There's also the opportunity for post-traumatic growth. And so that's what your listener is talking about right there. And what makes it one of the biggest differences between post-traumatic stress disorder and post-traumatic growth, and I hope that your audience has a chance to look these terms up, and I write about all of this stuff on my blog too, and I've been interviewed about this, is the meaning that you attach to the suffering. And so once again, when he talked about, Paul referred to his niece, when you're in it, one of the most important things all of us can do is take a step back, create the space to not be opinionated, to not give advice, to witness it, essentially to not say a word. And then when somebody is starting to come out of it, when they're ready, when they ask you, then you start to attach meaning to the suffering. So it's no coincidence, Arms, that heart has been on my mind so much recently. And you think about the name of your social media company, that, right? Little Heart.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And so I appreciate that. No, we can. The thing is, we can be both too. This division going on, okay? So I can be in trauma and still be in joy. I can be in sadness and still be enjoying myself. That it doesn't have to be either or. In fact, it's the joy. Paul, it was Paul, right? Referring to his niece that way.
Yep.
That you can be both. So that we're so complicated, and we're way more than the two-dimensional that the general media portrays. And this is why I really wanted to be here with you, Arms, is because it requires a live conversation, not a static video. It requires a conversation, and it's ongoing.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about, you talk about the changes in the pandemic. Like in 2019, if you were to, I was kind of mulling around doing a podcast and then going to a studio and recording it and then banging out all these episodes. And, I love doing, this streaming because I literally set up in my home office. I come down and just do it, but it allows for that conversation to flow and let time kind of engulf in those ideas.
But you had to be under a certain amount of pressure to
for
create
sure.
the diamond. And now the thing is, Arms, you're the producer.
That's what I love doing.
You're the marketer, you're the producer, you're the writer, you're everything. And that's why also I like doing all my own content. I mean, right? I read my blog, my code, everything, because when my husband sees me, it's like, she's in flow, because we can talk about mindfulness and being a friend. So that is the place where all of us find our passions, whether it be basketball, reading, sewing, knitting. And it'd be great if your audience just threw in all the things that they're passionate about, because that's what gets you to the penthouse,
I think that's part of it, right? Because the passion is a gift, and it continues to grow. Hopefully people start to absorb it and say, hey, wait a second, this is somebody who really loves what they do.
Yes. And it doesn't have to be a job. And that's one of the biggest things, because people come to me around purpose, that your purpose is your personality. So that my enthusiasm was actually my PhD research. And that essentially to that point, they assumed that being animated with smile, gesture, intonation, you name it, was Dr. Fox, when in fact, it engages students in learning. It connects them. It gets them motivated for further learning. So all the things that you use as a communicator that you were taught in broadcasting school, what you are is equally Professor Arms, because you're teaching too.
I always said to people, I just kind of fly by the seat of my pants, and it's worked out pretty good for me so far. So
it works, because you're yourself. And you're humble, so that's really important too.
I just try to do what I can do, Dr. D.
Good.
Shirley says here on Facebook, she goes, I need to shut off all the negativity and think of the here and now.
Shirley, what and everybody else there, what brings you back to the moment? I'll tell you something that will constantly bring you back to the moment, Shirley, is comedy, laughter. It's like an instant vacation. It's like, right, and it's an instant unifier. And that's what we need to see more of. See, we can be light in serious. Serious does not solve the problem. It really doesn't. Serious does not solve the problem. That rarely is the answer in the problem. So we have all this division between vax and anti-vax, between liberal and Democrat, between NDP, whatever. No, it's just us. And how are we united? We're united through laughter. We're united through that we all have to sleep, that we all have to eat, that we all, think of ways that we're united. So many ways.
I don't want to, one of my mandates, I guess, of the show was like never to get super political. I will say this though, Dr. D, I am so sick of seeing the negative political stuff that gets out there. And when you talk about, it's like I said to my wife the other day, we were watching something, unfold. I think we were watching on CNN or something. And I said, God, just reach across the aisle and say, listen, like you said, I live here, you live here. We got to figure something out. So let's just do it. And then, you kind of gain allies that way. You get to see that common ground. Like, I think everybody's so cut and dry about that division. Like you said, like, oh, we're this, we're that. Okay. What is the common ground? How can we move this forward?
And 100%. And the division comes from a place of fear. And we acknowledge that we all go into a place of judgment when we're in fear. So if you find yourself gossiping, being negative, judgmental, ask yourself, what does that person trigger in me? And so back to humor, whatever it is, Dr. Catherine Garland, she is a good friend of mine. She's a writer. She's an incredible writer. So I encourage everybody to look up her work. I had an interview with her about situational anxiety versus clinical anxiety. And we can talk about that on another episode too, but we had a good back and forth recently about aliens. So if aliens are here, we need to be united. And all of a sudden, we all have something in common. It's like when you're a different country and you find somebody from Canada and you're best friends. Mm-hmm. So that whenever we're divided, that somebody who encourages that is their agenda, not your agenda. And so that's why, and one of the articles, the most recent article I wrote in the drive is called 12 Days of Self-Care, where it takes you through 12 with this incredible, talk about inspiration story about a local, Danielle. Right? Danielle, right? Yep. This incredible story. And that get silent, get comfortable with your voice. I think a lot of times that people aren't connected to themselves. And then they're more in. And so what we're talking about is tribal mentality. And tribal mentality is the lowest level of connection.
Dr. D is my guest here. We got so many comments getting in here. Let's keep with that thread here. Eric from Eyes on Windsor joining the chat with us saying, Dr. D, what's the best thing to say to somebody who calls every day and all they talk about is negative? They're focusing on the pandemic, who's sick, how many tested positive, all negative news in the city around the world, fires, cars, accidents. And he goes on to say, especially when you just suggest positive things and tell them to look for the positive too, and they just seem to dismiss or even ignore those suggestions.
First of all, I love Eric's picture.
He's just taking a bite.
Eric, Eric, you don't pick up the phone.
Yeah.
You don't pick up the phone. No joke. You don't pick up the phone. Essentially what we're talking about is a boundary. Then you start picking up the phone every other day, then every fourth day, then every eighth day. When someone's in a negative state, we assume that the best way to handle it is with a positive emotion. And what I learned from teaching online for 18 months straight with students that are and I'm continuing to answer this question, that students that are very highly overstimulated, because stress is really physiological. Stress and anxiety and trauma response is the most physiological out of all of the mental health issues. And people need to be able to take it down. What I did with all of these students is I responded with facts. not the right side of my brain, which is touchy-feely full of with facts. So I would copy and paste the course outline, whatever it was back, and then it would just calm them down. So this person, God love him, okay, I'm just saying, he refers to basically, and I can be, listen, I'm that person, I can be that person to my husband. And yeah, Arms, you have days like that too. I mean, we're that,
all the time.
Everybody,
all the time.
Everybody that we see, like, I'm in my professional mode now, right? But I'm that person, right? I'm that person. We're all that person. And if my husband, who's a CPA accountant, so he's as logical as you can get, he'll only respond with facts. I don't get an audience from him. When I was a kid, my mom would walk out of the room. My dad would walk out of the room, and they'd always say to us that we see you as so capable, 10 kids in total, 4 in our immediate family, so that they would listen if it was an acute problem, like literally, it was an acute problem, so it was an emergency, something bad happened, but 99.9 times out of 100, it was just something I could handle. So that's the difference between when your child's starting to learn how to walk. If you start running in to pick them up, they never get it. So let that person, Eric, find another audience, even if it's a family member. Like, say to them, you know what, I'm going to put you on block for the next, I'm going to tell them you're putting them on block. I'm going to put you on block for the next 3 weeks. And I encourage you to write in a journal. Think highly of that person, highly than if you just give into, if you give into, you basically think they're weak. You let them find another audience. Trust me, they will. They'll be that go-to person.
Dr. D, it's like that old saying, right? Misery loves company.
Yes. And I have very few people I can call. That's why I work out, I sleep, I eat, I do all those things.
You can call me anytime. Keep me on speed dial. You know,
ask anybody who knows me. They can never get through because I'm the kind of person, I believe so much in communication, Arms, that I'll tell you how you can reach me, and there are 100 ways to reach people, and it's that one way. And it's a very limited window because I need to be available for 300 students a semester. I need to be available for myself. So even with Eric, if he's given to that, it was Eric, right?
Yes.
If he's given to that one person, he's actually taken away from his wife. He's taken away from his kids. He's taken away from himself. And I'll tell you this much, most likely, you've just invested 45 minutes with that person and it hasn't changed a thing. You're just exhausted.
Testify to that. It's like you get sucked into that cave of negativity, right? Yeah. Let's go back to some comments here, Dr. D. Angela says, hey, I need a little pick-me-up from all the negativity lately and how to get out of that funk. Perfect timing to being able to tune in tonight. Thank you to you both.
I can feel the heart. Thank you, Angela.
Appreciate that, Angela. Thanks for watching here. This one's coming from Lorraine. She goes, a quote I love from Abraham Lincoln. I laugh because I must not cry.
Yes. And it is so, I love it because what's happening is so over the top. It's so dismantling. Everything about our world is being dismantled right now, from the religion, from schools, from countries, from Mother Nature, like everything. It's like a new renaissance. Like everything is coming down, and we have to laugh because otherwise exactly that will cry. And by the way, give yourself time to cry. That's good too. Because when you cry, all of the stress hormones come out. It's a good thing too. All of it. Just feel what you need to feel, but put a time limit on it.
Eric says, thank you for the great advice. So there you go.
Oh, good. I'm gonna step out of the screen for 1 second.
Yeah, not a problem. Dr. D is my guest here on the show. We are talking a little bit about resiliency. We're talking a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, finding your, getting back to basics, like Dr. D was saying. Happy to have Dr. Andrea Dinardo on the show. Always been a fan of her work. She does some incredible work here locally. Obviously, talking from an organizational standpoint, the health unit asking her to come in, talk a little bit about resiliency and what that means for frontliners. And that's honestly, Dr. D, that's a long haul for these folks.
And that's, yes.
And it's
that's
like, there's
no have compassion too, right?
Yeah. And there's no end in sight. I mean, I'm not trying to be negative. It's just, it's 2 years they've been firing all cylinders, and God bless them. That's all I got to say,
And Arms, because we have positive, we have negative, and we have the truth. And that's exactly what this is. I mean, it is, we don't know how long it's going to be. And that's why mindfulness is so important. I'm just showing that this is a little timer that my mom used when we were kids. to set a time limit on negativity. And
That's awesome.
and
Like,
full disclosure, my mom's a psychologist too. So, so we were raised with it. So when you actually put a time limit on things for many different things, but yeah, we don't know. We don't know. And that's why mindfulness, mental health, wellness, humor, connection, and what you out of 7 days of the week, two, 3, 4 days, you might have, I call it the COVID day, like those days where you feel like everything's coming in on you. But what a difference a day makes, because time does, like, it's different now. And I know everybody's so in a different position, but time, like I find like the next day, like you get a good night's sleep and you back to being prepared and you feel that you can handle it. And even what's happening at school, like we've been there. Like this is 2 years in it. We're gonna, whatever needs to be done, we're gonna do it. All of us are gonna do it. Whatever needs to be done, we're gonna do it.
yeah, and I think that's key too for a lot of folks is you know, taking a look at what you want to invest your time in, right? And
Yes.
you touch base on that, Dr. D, too, about the Great Resignation, and I've been watching this sort of unfold for the last year when
Yes.
it really started to come to the forefront in the media. And I know that you're pretty active on LinkedIn. I get on LinkedIn when I can too, and to see some of these recruiters, and I'm sure that you have recruiters or HR folks that you are um, connected with on LinkedIn, but to see some of these stories about these companies that are being a little bit more progressive in the sense that they're allowing some flexibility for their employees versus the ones that are very much mandating some rigid policies and protocols onto how the work is getting done. I'd be very interested, Dr. D, to see where all this goes in the next 2 years with the workforce.
It's going to change, and it's already changed. So exactly what you're saying, that I've always said work to the work,
Yeah.
not the time. And so that if you have an employee who's productive, then they're going to get the work done. And if they do it, for example, I'm a morning person, so this is actually like midnight for me.
God bless you.
You're worth it. Your audience is definitely worth it. That's why I was managing my energy today for sure. So that when I first started working for the school board 1998, and I was a chief psychologist, I was training. So this was before I came to Windsor. I moved to Windsor in what year was it? 2002. And there was a 6 to a 12-month wait to get a psych assessment. And so I said to the administrators, what we need to do is have all the staff work from home on Fridays. We need to get them all laptops, and we need to have them essentially give them work autonomy. And they went from a 9 to 12-month wait list for psych assessments turnaround to a 1-month wait list turnaround. Because if you look at the research on industrial organizational psychology and organizational behavior in terms of retention, that all companies are going to have to employ the millennials. You're a millennial, right? The millennials have always had it right, because we need to be more flexible. We need to look at all of everything, because you won't be able to retain people. Like people are like at the college, like every day there's a new position being posted, and people are saving money. Like everybody, I know people that are in service. There's so many other situations that they're in a really tough spot right now. But people that are employed because they're not traveling or they're not sort of indulging in things, that they're even at wherever I go, people are saying, you know what, I'm going to sell a car. I'm going to downsize. I'm going to do whatever it takes, because I can't do exactly what you're talking about. They can't do this rigid way of doing work anymore, because we are so trapped by the pandemic that we need freedom. And by the way, you can give it to your employees and you can trust them to do the work. But
Well, Dr. D, 100% on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it should very much go to a performance, right?
Yes.
From a manager standpoint. I mean, I've never really managed, but long before I got into broadcast, I used to run a computer store at Devonshire Mall for a couple of years, and we used to have certain metrics we would have to hit. And I would say to the team all the time, and this is back 99, 2000, 2001, as long as, I don't care how you're selling or how many people are coming in the store, as long as we're able, those metrics are hit, right? So you got to figure out what you got to do. Now, from a work at home standpoint, I mean, I'm a type A person and I primarily work from home now in my position. I mean, I'm in the community when it's safe to do so. And, I do like the face-to-face contacts. But for me, it's like I'm a type A. So like I'll be down here in my man cave when Liam's asleep and Carrie's watching TV, and I know I have a project due. Guess who's working until midnight? Because I want to supersede expectations on it,
Yes. Yes.
right? But then I have that flexibility in the morning
Yes.
to wake up and give my son breakfast, or if he has a doctor's appointment, go do it. I honestly, I would never. I right now, 2022, Dr. D, I wouldn't trade that for the world.
See,
Simple as that.
and they get the best out of you. They get the best out of us. So what we're talking about is also a cross section between personality and productivity.
Yeah.
So that one of the things I talk about, so I teach in the nursing program, liberal arts. I also deliver all the electives across. I'm one of many people, but wellness, health, psychology. I taught at the university for 9 years, Windsor, at the Teachers College. Before that, I taught at Western. And I always say to students that school gives you the skills, but it's your personality that sets you apart on the job. So a lot of students that aren't successful in school, it's because school is one way, which is really left brain, which is sequential. And that's what I love about the college because, and you know this from your work in broadcasting. And by the way, I see in a VP role, maybe when John Fairley retires, just saying, put it up there. Just put it out there. I mean, you're fit for it with the fundraising and the communications background. And so basically, when you can empower somebody as a professor, as a psychologist, as a coach, as a parent, as a spouse, to bring out the best in who they are and trust them, you will get the best out of them. So if I have students, like half my students are procrastinators and half my students are type A that get things done ahead of time. So I always say the procrastinators, that's because the way they're built. They have to get to the point that they're overstimulated and it becomes like a slot machine. Like they're gonna, and half your audience is procrastinating. It's like it just works for them. I'm the opposite. I'm always up here. Like when I'm wearing my Lionheart at the gym, I just show up and like I'm ready. And so I'm always looking to bring my stimulation down. So that's one of the reasons you like to get to work, Arms, because the way your personality is, you'd rather do something called problem-focused coping versus emotion-focused coping. So you get the work done, and it's very calming for you.
Yeah, it is.
And your work benefits. But if you have somebody who's the opposite, don't penalize them for it. Like work to their personality, the flexibility. So there's so much that we can do to essentially bring out the best in everybody. And that's why there are all these books that are like the 4-hour work week and the 8-hour work, whatever it is. That's legit because most people, when they're forced to be in a spot for 9 hours, whatever, they're only having 90 minutes of productive work.
Yeah.
Because
not
because they're bad, but because that's sort of when they hit their peak, the flow.
Man, there's so much ground we can cover, Dr. D. I think there's so much. I'm like making notes as you're talking. So I'm like, okay, next time she's on, I'm gonna ask her this. But want to get to a couple more comments because they continue to roll in here. We have one here from Paul saying, again, laughter is a universal language.
Yes, like binary 0, 1. And that's the connector right there. Like instant, absolute connection. And it's an instant vacation too. I love that. Great quote.
And we've got another one here from Bethany who says, I love the stopwatch for negativity. That's awesome.
Use your phone, use the stove, you name it. And you know what? Make it a game for kids. Like it is fun. And it's actually a great motivator too. So when you don't feel like doing something, like for me, speaking's easy, writing is more work. So I always say that I'll sit down and write for 10 minutes and then that's it. And I also talk to my students about romancing their desk, like set up, the atmosphere for it. So that you're only gonna work for 10 minutes and all of a sudden you hit the flow because you've said you're gonna do 10 minutes. So yeah, the timers are a great way to motivate your kids, motivate yourself, and put a time limit on negativity.
Beth also goes on to say here, she goes, what you invest in your time, Dr. D, and what you want to expose yourself to, news, people, etc., guarding your heart, your eyes, and mind, it helps for sure.
Bethany, excellent points. It's true. So I've been talking actually in 2022 about titanium boundaries. Titanium boundaries. So drop those boundaries so that back to the Doc Marten combat boots, like empower yourself that that every time you open the news, there's going to be words that are just going to like rattle you. So go in there with those boundaries. So we need physical boundaries, we need emotional boundaries, all of that. We never talked about boundaries like this before, Arms, because we lived in a very physical world. So 2022 has really sped up the energetic world, so that a lot of this anxiety that we're seeing in kids isn't in fact clinical anxiety, it's over arousal. So what are your kids looking at on their phone? What are you looking at? It's this constant stimulation. So what I'll do when I need to do work, I will literally lock everything I own in the trunk of my car, because creativity has I'm tempted like everybody else. So creativity does not come from there. Creativity comes from here. And so you need to put yourself actually to a place of boredom. So one of the ways to talk about negativity and overstimulation, like just stare at a wall to the point that you're bored, and then ideas start to jump in, and just give yourself that downtime. And for some of your listeners that maybe they need, we talk about this in class too, maybe they need to park the car down the street before they come home and just like have that time and just bring it all down, sort of create that buffer, don't, when I was a kid, my mom would always say, if you want something from your dad, just wait till after dinner. Like we all have
I love
like
that.
timer, and timing's everything.
Yeah, I say to Carrie all the time too. I said, whenever you want to ask me about something to purchase something or something off Wayfair, usually wait till I'm done after dinner. And I've had dessert. No, honestly,
you're like satiated. You're like chill. Like the serotonin's there. You got dopamine. You have to remember, our body is I teach a course called Drugs and Behavior, and our body is its own pharmacy. Our body is its own pharmacy. And so we tap in it through sleep. We tap in it through laughter. We tap into it through food. We tap into all these ways, and drugs are a fake imitation of all those things. And so that, the more, basically what we're talking about is the better we understand ourselves, the more self-compassionate we are, because media is also teaching us to hate ourselves, because then we'll buy stuff.
Yeah. I think that's a slippery slope too, right? Like that's one of those things where it's like, oh, I feel terrible about myself for whatever reason. I'm going to go fill a hole with a new TV, or I'm going to go buy another pair of shoes I don't need, or I'm going to go buy, and then it feeds into that consumerism that it's like the never ending cycle that you can never fill that hole,
Yeah. So what you do, and what I do at the mall, is I do the walk around. So I'll say, can you please put that on hold? And I'll walk around the mall, and 9 times out of 10, I don't come back from it. So I want that thing on Wayfair, then I put it on a 24-hour hold, or back to time, or because basically then you think, okay, I'll just rearrange my furniture instead.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they send you put it in your cart. They'll send you a coupon. They say, we noticed you put something in your cart.
So essentially we're saying hack the system. We are smarter than the system. Like everybody on the other side of the screen right now, as I say to my students when they're writing a test, get the smartphone watch off, get this. And I always say, you're so much smarter than your smartphone. Aren't you, Arms? We are. Put the human back in human nature.
I love it. So Dr. D, you will, I'm hoping you make some, if you have time, I would absolutely be honored if you would hop on again with us sometime soon in the next couple of months. I appreciate that.
And you know that we've been working on this for a year, coming together, and you were very patient and very encouraging. And when it's meant to be, it's meant to be, and I look forward to it. And I will be back. Thank you.
You are welcome. And if people want to hook up with you, they want to get a little bit more about what you do, you've got lots of ways that you can connect with folks, right?
Yeah, so I would encourage them to Google Thriving Under Pressure. And I started a blog in 2016 for students for all of this. And I have 240 posts up there. And I have about 200 videos on YouTube. So Dr.Andrea Dinardo, Thriving Under Pressure. I also have a TEDx talk that's 12 minutes. Essentially, every time I talk to people, I think, oh, there's a new idea. So what I like to do too is a 3-hour lecture, and then I'll do a 3-minute video, because I do on Arms. I honor your time, and I honor the time of your audience. And I want to make sure that I provide something of value. And I'm very blessed to be here with you. And I consider myself very blessed to be a member of Windsor Essex community. So thank you for having me.
I think the region is better off to have folks like you sort of making sure that we can change our mindsets in a very positive
Yes.
manner. So, a blessing, and I am so grateful to have that time with you tonight. So, thank you so much, and I will be in contact soon to get you back on, hopefully in the next little bit.
Thanks, Arms. Say hi to Carrie and hug Liam for me.
God bless you. Thanks, Dr. D. Dr. Andrea Dinardo, what an amazing lady. You can read all of her latest work in the Drive magazine. Her articles are stellar. Her blog posts and her YouTube videos, honestly, are something to behold when it comes through the content. Her content is just absolutely incredible, and she's just a warm, very heartfelt individual who's doing some incredible work here in the Windsor Essex area. So if you want to find out more information, you can hook up on my website, armsbumanlag.com. Find those past podcasts, get that information on Dr. D, and hopefully I can get her back on the show. I think I will, judging by some of the content and comments. Paul saying, hey, great episode with Dr. D. Mike Coffin, good buddy of mine from Roy LePage. Thank you. Interesting perspective. Bethany saying, such an incredible episode. Eric, my man, great show tonight. Lyra, very interesting and helpful ideas. Thanks. And our good buddy Paul saying, hey, thanks, Arms. Great episode. Angela, made my night. Thanks, Arms and Dr. D. Our absolute pleasure. Folks, this is what this show is about. If you're not familiar with the Arms Bumanlag project, this was a passion project of mine to launch back in May. Get past all the negativity in the news, get past all the, pardon my language, crap that's out there, that vision, and to really have those honest to God conversations with folks who live, work, breathe Windsor Essex about what we can do to support each other, what we can do to talk about some of the issues that we have at hand and find those equitable solutions. Hopefully get those ideas churning and pumping here on the program. That's why I love doing this show, and it really is a passion project for me. And I hope that you enjoy it as well. Close to 47 episodes of the project. If you're new to the show, you can find out those on audio. You can listen on Apple Podcasts or check out my YouTube page for more information. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Arms Bumanlag Project. Coming up next week, we got the returning Adam Castle, who's going to be back with us, Director of Venture Services from We Tech Alliance and the Red Shoe Society, leaning into that of his portfolio, talking a little bit about what the Red Shoe Society does. And we'll talk about all sorts of things to do with Windsor Essex, the new year, you name it. We'll probably cover it next week. That's happening Tuesday, January 18th at 8 p.m. live here on Facebook and on YouTube and Twitter. Have a great rest of the evening. Thank you so much for spending it with me. And don't forget, you can contact me anytime on my social media channels. And hopefully we will see you live again next week here on the Arms Bumanlag Project.